Hello everyone. Today we will continue with the rest of the cerebellum. So, in the last lecture we were discussing about the cerebellar circuit, right? The neural circuit within the cerebellum. So, what we discussed was internal cerebellar circuit, right? Internal cerebellar circuit. All these cells of the cerebellum like the Purkinje cell, granule cell, the Golgi, basket and stellate cell, how they are interconnected with each other and how they are connected with the output is only the Purkinje cell, and that output goes to the deep cerebellar nuclei, right? Deep cerebellar nuclei, and the input was via the climbing fiber and Mozi fibers, right? Climbing fiber and Mozi fiber, and the climbing fiber was mainly the olivocerebellar pathway, right? The olivocerebellar pathway, the pathway, the afferent, the incoming pathway that is coming from the olivary nucleus will enter within the cerebellum via the climbing fiber, and the rest of the afferent pathway, irrespective of whether they are coming from the cerebral cortex or the spinal cord or from the peripheral part of the body, the rest of the body, they will enter via the Mozi fiber. So, we will continue about knowing what are these pathways. Like the climbing is connected or related with the olivocerebellar, then what are the other afferent pathways? So, they can be studied based on saying, like if we say the afferent pathway from we can say from the other parts of the brain, other parts of brain, okay, and B we will discuss about coming from the periphery, and like as I said, this is the brainstem and this is the cerebellum. This brainstem and cerebellum is connected with each other through three peduncles, right? Superior cerebellar peduncle, middle and inferior. And we said like the mainly afferent, which is coming from the spinal cord or the peripheral part of the body, afferent pathway, they will enter via the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and mainly efferent via superior cerebellar peduncle, which is going to the cerebral cortex, and middle was kind of a both way. But no, these are not the exclusive one. As I mentioned in the previous class, these are not the exclusive, like the superior cerebellar peduncle is just for the afferent. There are few of the efferent too, few of the these, like not only the outgoing, few of the incoming too. And similarly in the inferior cerebellar, not only the incoming, there will be few of the outgoing. So, we won't get into the confusion. There is no need to know which pathway enters via which peduncle, okay. Don't get confused. There is no need to know about. Nobody asked, not even in the first prof or the final prof or whatever the prof of the MBBS or in the PG enters. Nobody will ask you. So, there is no need to go into the confusion. So, these pathway, the afferent pathway. First, we will talk about the other parts of the brain. The other parts of the brain, the major one is corticopontocerebellar pathway. This corticopontocerebellar pathway means this is originating from the cortex, and from the cortex, where exactly in the cortex? From the motor cortex or premotor cortex, and few of the fibers might be from the other part of the cortex, like the somatosensory cortex too. So, these cortical fiber, they will go to the pontine nucleus within the pons, and from the pontine nucleus it will go to the cerebellum, and the important point is the tracks which are originating from the right side of the cerebral cortex will end up in left side of the cerebellum. Right sided in the left and left sided will end up in the right side of the cerebellum, okay. So, that's one. The other one are from the other parts of the brain. The second one, we can say, this is the first one. The second one is vestibulocerebellar tract. Now, the vestibulocerebellar tract, as the name itself suggests, vestibulum, either the vestibular nuclei, it will originate either from the vestibular nuclei within the brain stem, or few of the fibers directly comes from the vestibular apparatus like labyrinth. Directly, they don't even go or convey or relay within the brainstem vestibular nuclei. Directly some of the fibers, they will come and enter. And vestibulocerebellar tract, so vestibular, the part of the cerebellum which is concerned with the equilibrium or the vestibular apparatus was flocculonodular lobe, right? Flocculonodular lobe. So it will go and end up in the flocculonodular lobe. That is the second one, vestibulocerebellar. Now the third one is, we can say, the olivocerebellar. And olivocerebellar, if you can recall back, the olivocerebellar tracts were entering via the climbing fiber, and rest of the pathways they will enter via the Maury fiber. So olivocerebellar is, these tracts, they are originating from the inferior olivary nucleus. Okay, inferior olivary nucleus. And where exactly, like this inferior olivary nucleus, like what kind of the information it is providing, and like say the fibers, they will originate from this and go to the cerebellum, but the neurons that is located within the inferior olivary nucleus, they must get excited from somewhere, right? So they are getting excited by the proprioceptive input from entire of the body, proprioceptive information from the entire body. Proprioceptive information means about the position of the joints, about what is happening to the muscle, right? So inferior, this one, olivocerebellar tract provides that information to the cerebellum. Now the fourth one, the first is corticoponto, second vestibulo, third is olivo. The fourth one, we can say it is reticulocerebellar, reticulocerebellar tract. And this reticulocerebellar tract is, it originates from the reticular formation within the brainstem, okay, within the brainstem, and then it will end up in the cerebellum. So that is the, like we can say, the other parts of the brain which is coming. Now coming to the peripheral part. Peripheral part means periphery of the body. Periphery means the rest of the body, okay, periphery, rest of the body. So among the rest of the body, there are so many pathways, and different books give the extensive list of all these things, but there are 4 major pathways that is coming from the periphery, and those 4, they have been subdivided into 2 each. 2 are from the, which are located in the dorsal aspect of the spinal cord, and the one which are located on the ventral aspect. So we call them dorso-cerebellar or dorsal cerebellar tract, and ventral cerebellar tract, okay, ventral cerebellar tract. And related to these dorsal and ventral cerebellar tract, similar to them is cuneo-cerebellar tract. If you can recall the ascending pathways, we have read about the cuneo-cerebellar tract, right? So what is the function of these dorsal, ventral or cuneo-cerebellar tract? These tracts, the fibers from these tracts, they are dorsal and ventral based on location within the spinal cord, whether the dorsal part of the spinal cord or the ventral part of the spinal cord. They provide proprioception and joint reception or joint receptors that is present from different part of the skeletal, axial skeletal, okay, axial skeletal. So the dorsal one, it provides, it is coming from, say, if I draw this diagram like this way, dorsal one is carrying the information regarding the lower limb and the trunk part, okay, lower limb and the trunk part, that is the dorsal spinocerebellar tract. And ventral one carries the information from the, we can say ventral is related with the limbs, whether they are upper limb or lower limb. Okay, upper limb or lower limb. Like the dorsal spinocerebellar tract is carrying the information from the lower part of the trunk and lower limb. Similarly, cuneo, if you can recall back the cuneatus, cuneo is concerned with the upper trunk and upper limb. Upper trunk and upper limb is cuneocerebellar tract. Cuneocerebellar tract. So dorsal cerebellar tract or dorsal spinocerebellar tract, one and same thing. They carry the information from the lower limb and lower part of the trunk, upper part of the trunk and upper limb from the cuneocerebellar tract, and ventral one carries both from the lower and upper limb. Few of the proprioception. Now, these proprioception and joint receptor, they are carried from via, what are the sensory receptor for them? Muscle spindle, Golgi tendon organ. Okay, muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ. So, if we can recall back these muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ, they were carrying the information regarding how much strong the muscle contraction is happening. So, they provide information about the muscle contraction, and or we can say the force and rate at which these movements are happening within the body. Okay. So, we can say the Golgi tendon organ and muscle spindle, they provide the information to the cerebellum about that motor activity is happening and how strong and in what proportion or at what rate that is happening. That information is provided to the cerebellum via these three tracts: dorsal cerebellar, ventral cerebellar and cuneocerebellar tract. Okay. So, there are few others, like among them the important one is tectocerebellar tract. Tectocerebellar tract. Now, this tectocerebellar, what does this tectocerebellar do? Tectum. The tectum part in the brainstem, it has two important concerned structure with respect to this tectocerebellar is superior colliculus and inferior colliculus. Now, the superior colliculus and inferior colliculus, they are concerned, superior is concerned with the visual pathway, okay, vision, and the inferior is concerned with the auditory. So, the visual and auditory information, visual and auditory sensation, they are carried via tectocerebellar to the cerebellum. So, these are the major afferent pathways. There might be few of them like rubrocerebellar tract, that is regarding the red nucleus information. Okay, but major is, we can say, the cortico-pontocerebellar tract, then we covered olivocerebellar tract, then we said vestibulocerebellar tract, right, vestibulocerebellar tract, then what was the other? Reticulocerebellar tract, olivocerebellar, reticulocerebellar, these four. Then there is dorsal cerebellar, ventral cerebellar, cuneocerebellar, tectocerebellar, one is rubrocerebellar. So, all these afferent pathway or incoming pathway within the cerebellum, they in a way carries the entire awareness. Like, this is not a medical term, but in a general layman language we can say the awareness about the presence of the body, like in from like kind of at what we can say, like the proprioception, they are carried via this one, like in which position the body is present and what kind of the movement is being performed, because the major function of the cerebellum is planning is one, the other one was fine tuning, right, fine tuning the movement. So, what kind of the movement is getting performed over there, okay, what kind of the movement, what is kind of the posture and tone of the muscle within the skeletal muscle, right, posture and tone, accordingly that can be modified to fine tune any movement to perform, we can say. So, all those information, not only the proprioception and the jointception, it also receives the visual and auditory sensation too, okay, visual and auditory sensation 2. Now these spinocerebellar tract, so we can say the brain, these spinocerebellar tract, we won't go into detail like at what part, like the dorsal cerebellar tract will end in the intermediate hemisphere or the which side. Just remember, these pathways, they carry the information about the proprioception, visual and auditory sensation or posture or tone of the muscle to the cerebellum. Okay. And these the important feature about these spinocerebellar tract is these pathways, they carry at very fast rate. The velocity of the spinocerebellar tract is 120 meter per second, right? 120 meter per second. It is up to that fast. It is kind of the most rapid conduction in any pathway in the CNS. And why it is so fast? Because the extremely this fast conduction, it is important so that you can instantaneously know about the change in the peripheral skeletal system. The cerebellum need to know about the current position of the skeletal system, like what is happening. Only then it will fine tune, right? Only then it will fine tune. That's why they are fastest conducting pathway. And Purkinje cell is the largest cell within the this central nervous system. Okay, largest cell. So that's all regarding the afferent pathway.